Conference realignment is full of surprises, and a big one has landed in DeKalb as the Mountain West has called dibs on the Chicago metro area's only Group of 5 program. Located 65 miles west of Chicago, DeKalb would be added to the Chicago metro area for the 2000 census due to the high number of people in DeKalb County commuting to the Chicago area for work. The Huskies on Andy Glidden Road have come a long way since the 90s when they broke the nation's longest losing streak and dunked the goalpost in the lagoon. From undefeated against Alabama to undefeated against Notre Dame, from being part of a top 25 college game day matchup in 2003 to crashing an Orange Bowl in 2012, from Diesel to Mission to an incredible 15 boneyard victories over the past 23 years, the NIU Huskies have made themselves known to college football fans in the 21st century. Known for the invention of barbed wire and for giving us Cindy Crawford, DeKalb will now be welcoming visitors from the Mountain West. The local establishments like Fatty's, or Molly's, or the world-famous pizza at Lord Stanley's, or maybe the Paperback Grotto. November weeknight games pose significant challenges for NIU attendance as so many alumni work in Chicago and cannot get off work or escape rush hour traffic in time to make it to a 6 p.m. or 6:30 game out in DeKalb. And that's to say nothing of the challenge of the harsh weather on those November weeknights. And you can see the toll of years of those November weeknight games have taken on NIU's fan base. Now, digging a little deeper into those red dots on this graph is this chart of NIU's attendance from 2003 to 2023, so 20 seasons. Using 2003 as a baseline, NIU's attendance decline ranged from 11% to 42% between 2008 and 2014 when one MACtion home game was most common. Once two MACtion home games dominated from 2015 to 2023, NIU's decline accelerated from 40% in 2015 to 52 to 55% in 2016 through 2018 before finishing at 60 to 64% in 2019 through 2023. In fact, if you look at average attendance per decade, attendance declined 49% from a 20,909 average in the 2003 to 2013 range compared to the 10,717 average in the 2014 to 2023 range. Using the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics database and looking at ticket revenue but adjusting for inflation, you can see the trend of NIU's inflation-adjusted ticket revenue from 2011 to 2022. Those blue dots when there was only one home MACtion game, pretty high up in 2011 and 2012. After 2015, once two home MACtion games became the norm, ticket revenue completely plummeted. Now here are the numbers behind that graph. NIU's ticket revenue declined 63% from $2.42 million in 2011 to $892,000 in 2022. So in the span of 11 years, it plummeted 63%. Now we look at the increase in the number of Monday through Thursday night conference games in the MAC. The MAC averaged 6.5 Monday through Thursday night conference games between 2004 and 2007 before increasing 58% to an average of 10.3 Monday through Thursday night conference games between 2008 and 2014. And it only accelerated more from there. The MAC averaged 17.1 Monday through Thursday night conference games between 2015 and 2024. That represented a 66% increase over the 10.3 average between 2008 and 2014 and nearly tripled the 6.5 average between 2004 and 2007. Now digging a little deeper into that increase of MACtion games, here's how many of those MACtion games were on which network by year. The number of those games that were on ESPN or ESPN2 remained in the 4 to 7 range for 20 years, from 2004 to 2023. It remained stagnant at 6 from 2013 to 2021 and at 7 from 2022 to 2023 before the increase to 9 this season in 2024. The increase in those MACtion games mostly went to ESPNU, which had a viewership average for MAC games of 104,000 in 2021 to 2024. They also went to CBS Sports Network, which is not Nielsen rated, and they also went to ESPN3 or ESPN Plus, which is streaming. So of that 6.8 yearly increase from the 2008 to 2014 range to the 2015 to 2024 range, only 0.9 of that 6.8 increase, which is about 14%, was for games on ESPN or ESPN2. So that means the other 86% of that increase were for games on ESPNU, CBS Sports Network, ESPN News, ESPN3, or ESPN Plus. So putting all of those graphs together, first attendance, using 03 as a baseline, NIU's attendance decline ranged from 11% to 42% between 08 and 14 when one MACtion home game was most common. Then once two MACtion home games dominated from 2015 to 2023, that decline accelerated from 40% in 2015 to 52 to 55% 2016 to 2018 before finishing at 60 to 64% in 2019 to 2023. Then shifting to inflation-adjusted ticket revenue, that declined 63% from 2011 to 2022, an 11-year span. Overall, that means announced attendance declined over 60% since 2003, and inflation-adjusted ticket revenue declined 63% since 2011. Now, if attendance and ticket revenue are declining that much, you would hope that the payoff would be in viewership. As the number of MACtion games increased significantly, it was 6.5 between 04 and 07, that increased by 58% to 10.3 between 08 and 14. Then that increased to 17.1 between 15 and 24, which is a 66% increase over that 10.3 average between 08 and 14, and nearly triple the 6.5 averaged between 04 and 07. However, the number of those MACtion games on ESPN or ESPN2 remained in the 4 to 7 range for 20 years, all the way up until 2023. The increase in those MACtion games predominantly went to ESPNU, so that's about 100,000 viewers for a MACtion game. CBS Sports Network, not many people watching that, as it's not even Nielsen rated, or ESPN3 or ESPN Plus, streaming. So only 14% of that increase in MACtion games went to the networks that matter, ESPN or ESPN2. Looking at football budgets, you can see why NIU is making a move for more revenue. If you use Sportico's database, NIU's football budget was third from last. And if you use the Department of Education, Equity, and Athletics database, NIU's football budget ranked 130th in FBS. That plays into why NIU needs a cash infusion. Not only do they have a bottom 5 football budget in FBS, and not only did their ticket revenue decline 63%, inflation adjusted of course, from 2011 to 2022, but there's also that potential $4 million increase in costs looming from the House v. NCAA impact. The NIL-NCAA.com website breaks that impact down with their estimations. They have $506,000 for collective funding, $1.6 million for additional scholarships, $1.63 million for revenue sharing, so that came out to be $3.75 million potential impact. And why this Mountain West offer is so important is because whatever extra revenue NIU gets from the Mountain West, whether that's $2 million, $3 million, or $4 million, we don't know yet until the media deal is finalized, that's going to help. As for travel expenses, they will only increase minimally. You take whatever the 4 Mountain West charter flights cost, and then subtract whatever the 4 MAC charter flights cost, and then also keep in mind that Olympic sports will save slightly, as I would imagine they'll be in the Horizon League, we don't know yet. There was a Sportico article in 2021 that revealed the cost per charter flight for some programs. West Virginia was $187,000, Nebraska was $175,000, Texas State was $100,000. So my ballpark guess on estimating NIU's charter flight costs, I'm going to guess the West Virginia number, $187,000. So multiply that by 4 and that comes out to be $750K. So you take that $750K and then you subtract whatever NIU's charter flight costs were for 4 MAC games. So if NIU's charter flight costs for a MAC game were 1/3 of West Virginia's $187K, that would come out to $62,500. And then multiply that $62,500 by 4, that comes out to be $250,000. $750K minus $250K, I'm going to go with a $500K speculated increase. But that's just my best guess with how little information is publicly available. Part of NIU's appeal to the Mountain West was the strength of NIU football. Looking at the 10-year Sagarin rankings from 2014 to 2023, does not include 2024, NIU ranked 90th, which would be third in the Mountain West. Another part of the appeal to NIU and being near Chicago is the upcoming enrollment cliff. There's expected to be a 15% decline in the number of 18-year-old college-going students from 2025 to 2029. And one way for university presidents in the Mountain West to get ahead of that enrollment cliff is through access to the Chicago area, as Illinois ranks second in the country in the number of college-going students each state exports out of state. And Illinois would have represented 7% of the U.S. out-of-state college students. Now, Chicago also plays a role in the alumni distribution for Mountain West schools. You see them at number 12, 1.4% for New Mexico, number 4, 2% for Wyoming, number 10, 1.3% for UNLV, number 10, 1.7% for AFA, and number 13, 1.1% for Hawaii. So you have 5 Mountain West schools with over 1% of their alumni in Chicago, which allows schools the opportunity to reconnect and re-engage with their alumni that are Chicago located. So what does NIU bring to the Mountain West? Well, they open a new time slot, the Central Time Zone. They're located in the number 3 media market. And now some TV ratings, which we'll get to in the last part of the video. But for a little sneak peek, NIU was 26.9% above average in 12-year MAC ratings when isolating the opponent and the network. Second was Toledo at 4.2%. NIU was 26.8% above average in the 12-year MAC ratings when isolating the network. Toledo was second at 3.9%. So NIU was demonstrably above everyone in the MAC. NIU has a top 90 10-year Sagarin that would rank third in the Mountain West. NIU has 15 BCS/Power 5 wins over 23 seasons, including Notre Dame and Alabama. NIU crashed the Orange Bowl. They've won 5 MAC championships since 2011. And with the 15% enrollment cliff looming, Illinois is the number 2 state in out-of-state college students exported. There's also 5 Mountain West schools with over 1% of their alumni in Chicago. And what does the Mountain West bring to NIU? NIU needs a cash infusion. Whatever extra media or CFP money NIU gets from the Mountain West helps. Their football budget is bottom 5 in FBS. Their inflation-adjusted ticket revenue declined 63% from 2011 to 2022. There's a potential $4 million increase in cost looming from the House NCAA impact. And NIU needs to try something new to re-engage their fans and alumni. Attendance declined 55% from 2013 to 2023 and 49% from the 2003 to 13 timeframe to the 14 to 23 timeframe. And that coincided with a significant increase in the number of MACtion home games, with only less than 1/7 of that increase being for games on ESPN or the Deuce. As many know, NIU once pulled out of the MAC all the way back in 1985 to go independent. And here are some newspaper clippings of the time. NIU was unhappy with the MAC scheduling and scholarship policies back then. NIU wanted 95 scholarships instead of the MAC's limit of 85 scholarships. NIU also used 3 of 11 games to play Big Ten teams, while the MAC played 9 conference games, forcing the MAC to eliminate a conference game for someone. In the 85 season, it was Kent State, to accommodate NIU only playing 8. The Northern AD labeled the MAC conservative and unimaginative, citing the MAC's restriction of 85 scholarships instead of 95, and the MAC's requirements on the size of traveling squads in football and basketball, and the MAC's number of scholarships in non-revenue sports. He was also quoted, "In the MAC, we lacked the ability to move in our intended direction. We wanted to do on the athletic side what the university has done on the academic side. I've talked to athletic directors from all the schools we played in football this season. They all thought Northern was doing the right thing." The NIU football coach said, "They, the MAC coaches, cannot come right out and say the conference is hurting them, but they all felt like it was the sound thing for us to do. It's hard for them to operate under the conditions they're operating under." Meanwhile, NIU administrators cited cultivating the Chicago market both for gate receipts and television as their prime concern. One noted that Husky athletics could now start focusing on our common rivalries in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana for non-football sports. The NIU president was quoted as one of only 2 public institutions playing Division 1A football in Illinois. "We should compete with leading universities." In the Chicago Tribune's report of the press conference, they said a new basketball arena, expanding the 31,000-seat Husky Stadium, and then games in Chicago against major football and basketball opponents were among the ambitious plans unveiled by NIU at a press conference. The NIU athletic director was quoted, "The MAC is a conservative conference, and we had image problems. NIU was always at the forefront of moves to add 10 more football scholarships and travel with 15 instead of 12 basketball players. The NIU president was quoted as one of the nation's 40 largest universities. Northern Illinois should be more competitive with more appeal to the Chicago market. The athletic director was also quoted, "Northern has ambition and we're not ashamed of it. I don't think it's something to be fearful of when you say you want to be better than you are." The NIU AD said he hoped to eventually place NIU football in either the Big 8 or Big 10. The NIU AD said the basketball program may attempt to join the MCC or Metro Conference. In reality, they would be independent until joining the Mid-Continent in 1990. Now, the NIU men's basketball head coach was very opposed to leaving the MAC. He was quoted, "It could very likely be devastating to our recruiting without a chance for an NCAA tournament auto bid." The NIU athletic director, meanwhile, made a report with a 27-point list of disadvantages to the NIU's MAC membership. The athletic director made it clear the Huskies were interested in joining another conference. He agreed that aligning with other independents like DePaul and Marquette in a new basketball conference was a possibility. Now, when these comments were made in 1985, Marquette had one national title, 2 national championship games, and 3 Elite Eights over the past 10 years, while DePaul finished number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 6 in the AP poll in 6 of the past 8 years. Marquette was top 30 in the country with over 10,000 attendants selling out Mecca Arena, and DePaul was top 10 in the country with over 14,000 attendants rocking the newly opened Rosemont Horizon. All that to say that these comments were completely unrealistic in 1985. And so the reason we're pulling out those newspaper clips from 85 is to show how much different the thought process was between 85 and 2025. In 85, you had a lot of disputes and idealism-driven thinking. There was no initial landing spot for football or Olympic sports in 85. They had to go straight independent. Whereas here in 2025, the decision-making is more practical and it's more rooted in realism. There's actually a landing spot for football, the Mount West, and presumably Olympic sports. We're assuming they'll end up in the Horizon League. And Olympic sports, in fact, will actually save money on travel expenses. Now, in 85, you had additional disputes like NIU wanting 95 scholarships, the MAC wanted 85. NIU wanted 3 out-of-conference games for Big Ten opponents, while the MAC instituted a 9-game round robin, only 2 out-of-conference. NIU wanted to travel with 15 players in basketball. The MAC restricted basketball travel to 12. And then the idealism kicks in. The president was quoted as one of the nation's 40 largest universities. We should be competing with leading universities. Obviously, today, NIU is not a top 40 university in the country in enrollment. The AD said in 85 he hoped to land football in the Big 8 or Big 10 and men's basketball in a new conference with Marquette, DePaul, or the MCC. Now, today, there's no grand illusions of the Big 8 or Big 10 or a new men's basketball conference with Marquette or DePaul. Everything's grounded in reality. And there's also no disputes with the MAC like there were back then. And finally, in 85, they had a lot of dreams and ambitious plans like a new basketball arena, expanding the 31,000-seat Husky Stadium, and major football and men's basketball games in Chicago. Now, 40 years later, this decision is more driven by realism. It's a financial decision. A cash infusion is needed with a bottom 5 FBS budget and a potential $4 million increase in costs from the House NCAA settlement. Secondarily, it's also an alumni fan engagement decision. You had the inflation-adjusted ticket revenue declining 63% from 2011 to 2022. Attendance declined 55% from 2013 to 2023. That all coincided with MACtion increasing by a substantial amount, with not many games on ESPN or ESPN2 to show for it. NIU's football conference history started in the Little 19, otherwise known as the Illinois Intercollegiate Athletic Conference. That would later become the Interstate Intercollegiate Athletic Conference. NIU would then have their first stint in the MAC from 75 to 85. They would be in the Big West for 3 years from 93 to 95. And then they returned to the MAC from 97 to 2025. And now they will join the Mount West starting in 2026. NIU was in the Little 19 from 1922 to 1925 and then returned again in 1928. Some familiar faces were in there like Bradley, Illinois State, Eastern Illinois, Southern Illinois, Western Illinois. And then the smaller schools would eventually leave. You do have the Eureka Red Devils in there. That's where Ronald Reagan played. And eventually, the Illinois Intercollegiate Athletic Conference would be down to 5, and it would morph into the Interstate Intercollegiate Athletic Conference, where Eastern Michigan and Central Michigan would join up. And NIU would remain there until the mid-60s. Then NIU would join the MAC in 75, with the 3 Michigan schools, Ball State, and 5 Ohio schools. NIU would go independent after the 85 season. They would have a 3-year venture in the Big West, where they shared a league with Nevada, UNLV, and San Jose State, who will also be in the Mount West. Then NIU returned to the MAC in 97, and they will have stayed in the MAC for roughly 28 years, until 2026 when they will enter the Mountain West. So here's how the TV ratings portion of the video works. We do deep dive analytics here, so that means we go through the ratings accounting for the network and the ratings accounting for both the opponent and the network. And with that deeper dive, there's going to be a lot more details and repetitiveness, so there's 2 types of viewers that are going to have to choose a fork in the road here. If you're someone who enjoys all the details to the spreadsheet and explanation behind all the analytics, watch the final 20 minutes. If you want to keep it simple and you only want what you need to know, only watch the next minute and then skip to the final 4 minutes. Those 5 minutes are all you need to watch. Much like the video we had 4 months back on the Mount West TV ratings, here are the 12-year ratings from 2013 to 2024 for the MAC. These are regular season conference games only, no out-of-conference, no conference championship games, as we want apples-to-apples comparisons. And the first thing to point out here is when evaluating TV ratings, it is so important to account for both opponent and network. Comparing just average viewership with no control for opponent or network is like comparing the analytics of a hockey player on the power play to the analytics of another hockey player on the penalty kill. It's just not a good use of data if you're not controlling for at least the network. As in ratings, any game on ESPN is like being on the power play, and any game being on ESPNU is like being on the penalty kill. And as we saw with the Mount West video 4 months back, opponent and network can heavily skew the ratings, as you had a couple schools that completely flipped in their standings from the average viewership total category to the other categories after you controlled for the network or controlled for both the opponent and network. And that's why the total average viewership on this spreadsheet is in red. So how the spreadsheet works is if we go all the way to the right, you have each team's Nielsen rated conference regular season game over the past 12 years, and each game has the viewership number. So like if it says 0.406, that means they had 406,000. Then it would have the opponent, the opponent's average on that network, then how that game compared to the opponent's average on that network, then the MAC average on that network, and then how the rating for that particular game compared to the MAC average on that network. So on the left third of this spreadsheet, you have the average viewers and then the rank of your average viewers, followed by the sample size. Then that's followed by the opponent's average on the network and then the rank of the opponent's average on the network. Now, if we go to the right-hand third side of this spreadsheet in yellow, this is the metric that accounts for network, but it does not account for opponent. So in white, we have the MAC average on each network. Then as we move into the yellow, we have the over, under, plus, minus compared to the MAC average on that network. So for example, if it says negative 0.024, that means on average, Buffalo was 24,000 viewers below the MAC average viewers on a per network basis per game. Then to the right of that is the rank of that category. The middle yellow column is the over-under percentage compared to the MAC average on the network. If it's 1.000, that means you're exactly even with it. If you're below 1, that means you're below average. If you're above 1, that means you're above average. But the column directly to the right is more important. That's converting everything to a percentage which is more digestible. So you see for Buffalo, it says negative 8.3%. That means on average, on a per game basis, Buffalo, their viewership was 8.3% below the MAC average on that network. And then on the furthest right is each school's ranking in that category. Now the middle third of this spreadsheet is the most important part of the spreadsheet. This is accounting for both the opponent and network in your TV ratings. Your over, under, plus, minus compared to the opponent's average on the network, it's just taking your average viewers on a network minus your opponent's average viewers on a network. So you see Buffalo at negative 0.018. That means Buffalo on average on a per game, per network basis, averaged 18,000 less viewers than their opponent's average on that same network. Directly to the right would be the rank of that category. And then the middle green column, that's the over-under percentage compared to the opponent's average on the network. So it's basically the average viewers on a network divided by your opponent's average viewers on the network. And same thing like I just explained regarding the yellow part of the spreadsheet. 1.0 means you're exactly even. Below 1 means that you're below your opponent's average on the network. And above 1 means you're above your average opponent's average on that network. So now the final two green columns, those are the two most important columns. The over-under percentage compared to the opponent's average on a network, that's just taking the number to the left and translating it to an easy-to-comprehend percentage. So Buffalo at negative 6.4%, that means Buffalo on average was 6.4% below their opponent's average on that same network. And then the final column in green would be the rank in that category. So how did all the schools perform? First, let's start with the average viewership category, which is the worst metric on here. That is in red on the left. We had Ball State in first with an average of 410,000 viewers, but obviously that's going to be skewed because only 2 of their 14 games were on ESPNU. And it's also going to be skewed because the rank of their opponent's average on the network was first, meaning that their opponents were bringing Ball State's average up. So that meant Ball State was usually playing the other top-rated schools in the MAC when they had Nielsen-rated games. NIU was second in average viewership. Their rank of the opponent's average on the network was 6, so that means NIU was lifting whoever they played on the network ratings-wise. Toledo was third, Western was fourth, Ohio was fifth. Now in orange is how each school ranked in games only on ESPN2, since ESPN2 had the largest sample of Nielsen-rated games for the MAC. NIU was first on ESPN2, Toledo was second, Ball State was third, but then again, Ball State was first in the rank of opponent's average on ESPN2, so that was helping Ball State's ratings a bit. Western was fourth, and then Bowling Green was fifth on ESPN2. So now going to the right-hand side of the spreadsheet in yellow, that's going to be accounting for the network. We are going to look at the two final yellow columns, your over-under percentage compared to the MAC average on that network. And you see NIU was first, as they were a staggering 26.9% above the MAC average on a per-network basis over a 12-year span. Toledo was second at 4.2% above average. Western was third at 3.6% above average. And then the other 9 schools were all below average. Now shifting back to the middle of the spreadsheet, in green, the most important metric on here, which accounts for both the opponent and the network. And the final 2 green columns are the over-under percentage relative to the opponent's average on the network. In first was NIU, once again with a staggering 26.8% above the opponent's average on that same network on a per-game basis over 12 years. Toledo was second at 3.9%. Ohio was third at 2.0%. And then the other 9 schools were all in the negatives. Western Michigan was fourth at negative 0.3%. Miami was fifth at negative 1.5%. Bowling Green sixth at negative 1.6%. Now I'm going to shift to another tab that summarizes everything in an easier to read format. So this tab takes all the data from the other tab, but makes it way more easy to comprehend. At the bottom is the sample size for each network. The MAC had 69 Nielsen rated games on the Deuce, 56 on ESPNU, and 7 on the flagship. Now the first category in orange is going to be your ESPN2 average viewership. In the top row it says advantages or limitations. Obviously the limitations of ESPN2 average viewership is that it would not account for the opponent, and it would not account for games on ESPN or ESPNU. You see NIU leading the way with an average of 567,000, followed by Toledo in second. And then the column in white directly to the right, that's the opponent's average on ESPN2 for context. So you can see Ball State first. That inflated Ball State and helped them get up to third place. And then you'll see schools like Bowling Green, Ohio, and Miami. They were in the bottom 3 in their opponent's average on ESPN2. So that means their own ESPN2 viewership was artificially deflated due to the lack of the rating strength of their opponents collectively. So while Bowling Green finished 5th and Ohio 8th and Miami 10th, they were at a disadvantage. Now we move into the red, which is your average viewership. Obviously, this is in red for a reason because the limitations are they do not account for the network or the opponent. You can see Ball State, they had the highest opponent's average on network, so that helped them by a lot in order to have the highest average viewership. Whereas NIU's opponent's average on network was 6, so that would be a middle-of-the-pack strength of schedule, if you will. And yet they still finished in second anyway, nearly got first. So now we go into green, which is the best metric, and that is going to be the over-under compared to the opponent's average on the network. And the advantages here is they account for both network and opponent. You can see NIU was in first averaging 85,000 more viewers than their opponent's average on the network over a 12-year span. That would be 26.8% above their opponent's average on a per-game basis. Toledo was second at 13,000 viewers above their opponent's average, or 3.9%. Ohio was third at 6,000 viewers above their opponent's average per network, or 2%. Western Michigan was almost dead even, only 1,000 viewers below their opponent's average on the network per game. And then Miami in fifth, and Bowling Green in sixth. Now on the far right in yellow, that is your over-under relative to the MAC average on the network. So this accounts for network, but it does not account for opponent. NIU on average once again was 85,000 viewers above the MAC average on the same network, or 26.9% above average. Toledo was 14,000 viewers above the MAC average on that same network, or 4.2% above average. Western Michigan was 12,000 viewers above average, or 3.6%. Now if we go to the viewership rank tab, this shows all those MAC Nielsen rated games, all 132 of them, and it's divided up into quintets. So the blue is the top 20%, green is 20 to 40%, yellow is 40 to 60%, orange 60 to 80%, and red the bottom 20%. And as we scroll down, it kind of gives you an idea of how many games each team had in each percentile. And as we scroll to the bottom, there's a tab to the right that will make this a lot easier to digest in the viewership summary tab. And this is taking all that data and condensing it. So you can see how many games NIU and Toledo had in blue, which is the top 20%, and how many more games they also had in green, which would be top 40%. Of course, keep in mind this tab has no regard for the network or the opponent. So now we're going to move to the over-under to the MAC average on network rank tab, which ranks all the games 1 to 132 on the basis of how you scored relative to the MAC average on that same network. And then it'll show that same sorting data for each school. And the color codes are the same thing. They're in quintets, each 20%, blue top 20, green top 40%, yellow 60%, orange 80%, red bottom 20%. And we condense all that data into the over-under to the MAC average on network summary tab. So in the top row, over-under percentage, that was how you fared against the MAC average on that same network on a percentage basis. And then right below that, plus minus, it says 0.085 for NIU. That means NIU was 85,000 viewers above the average. And it has each individual game where it ranked in that over, under, plus, minus compared to the MAC network average. So like NIU had the first, second, third, fourth, sixth, ninth, 11th, and 13th. So that's 8 of the top 13 games in terms of how they fared when isolating for the network. Toledo was pretty similar. Toledo had the first, fourth, 8th, 11th, and 16th, and 18th. So that's 6 of the top 18. And you see NIU and Toledo had the number one game at 0.619. That 0.619 means that that game was 619,000 viewers above the MAC network on that average over those 12 years. Now we move to the over-under compared to the opponent's average on the network rank tab. So once again, these games are ranked by how each game compared relative to the opponent's average on the network. So it counts for both the opponent and the network. Once again, it's divided up into quintets, each 20% for each color. And we simplify all that data into the over-under relative to the opponent's average on network summary tab. So this tab accounts for both the opponent and the network. And as you can see, NIU had the first, second, fifth, sixth. So that's 4 of the top 6 games in terms of those games obliterating the opponent's average on the network. So NIU had games that were 586,000 viewers, 574,000 viewers, 447,000 viewers, and 380,000 viewers above whoever they played, that team's average on that same network. The first row, over-under percentage, is how all your games collectively compared to your opponent's average on the network. So NIU's was 26.8% above their opponent's average on the network. And then the row below, plus minus, 0.085 means that NIU was 85,000 viewers above their opponent's average on that same network on a per game, per network basis over 12 years. So to conclude everything in terms of MAC TV ratings, this slide demonstrates why NIU was desired by the Mount West and TV executives. Compared to the other options the Mount West had available, NIU was simply the safest bet with the most and longest demonstrated track record of delivering ratings in comparison to their peers. NIU was simply good for an extra 85,000 viewers compared to whatever MAC team they were playing, regardless of network or the opponent and network. And that came out to be a 26.8% or 26.9% increase over those 12 years. This is each school's 12-year over-under percentage relative to the network average for MAC games. So going from bottom to top is your over-under percentage that's relative to the MAC network average. So you have 0 in the middle, and then 0% to about negative 20 whatever percent, and then 0 going upward to 20 whatever percent. Obviously for this one, you want to be as close to the top as possible, and then generally to the right. So you can see that NIU blows everyone away, and then you have Toledo and Western, the only other schools above that 0% line. And now a scatter graph for the most important analytic, your 12-year over-under percentage to the opponent average on the network for MAC games from 2013 to 2024. So this accounts for not only the network, but also your opponent. Once again, you have that 0 in the middle, and it goes to 20% upward if you go up, and then if you go down, it goes to negative 20%. Here you want to be as close to the top as possible, and generally to the right. Once again, NIU is blowing everyone away. Then you would have Toledo in second, Ohio in third. Western is almost squarely right on that 0% line in fourth. And now the final graph, and the most important one, your 12-year ratings for MAC games. In the darker color to the left, that's going to be your over-under percentage relative to the MAC average on the network. So that accounts for network on the left, but not the opponent. And then the lighter color on the right, that's going to be your over-under percentage relative to the opponent's average on the network. So that accounts for both network and opponent. Obviously, 0 in the middle means 0%. You want to be as high as possible. And as you can see, NIU was 26.9% above average when accounting for the network, and 26.8% above average when accounting for both the network and opponent. Toledo was the only other school to be above average in both categories, as they were 4.2% when taking into account the network, and then 3.9% when taking account the opponent and network. Then you had Ohio above average in one but below average in the other, and same thing with Western, above average in one but below average in the other.